This is Frank. He's 102 years old, which, when you think about it, is actually kind of insane. He was born in Pownell, Maine, a town so small at the time that for his first 10 years of school, Frank was the only one in his class. Frank is somewhat of a legend in Yarmouth, where I grew up, and he's lived for the past 60-odd years. At the town's social pole star, this Dunkin' Donuts joined to a surprisingly good Chinese restaurant. Most people know his name. A few even know where he lives. Frank's kind of done everything over the past century. He managed his own pulpwood ventures, he cleared the plot for the town's new high school while he was still a student himself, and years later cleared the land for Maine's first interstate. He cruised timber in the Adirondacks during the Depression and quarried the granite for this crazy-looking bridge that unites Bailey and Orr's Island. He rebuilt the 200-year-old house we were sitting in and coached in Yarmouth's first Little League, the same one which I would disgrace with a career 168 batting average almost 40 years later. What's most amazing about Frank is that he seems to remember everything. Dates, names. He remembers the days of the week things happened in 1933 and the weather at the time. He has stories, 100 years of them. Like this one, about meeting his wife for the first time.
After I graduated in 25, I fell for the girl who was going to be my wife. I fell for her literally right off a barn that I was shingling that belonged to her uncle and broke my back. She called him and she rode in with me. And I can remember her sweet kiss just before we get to the hospital.
Frank is a tree man. Growing up on a farm, he's been involved with forestry since he was a kid. As a teenager, he and a friend cut 12 cords of hardwood pulp, dragged it out of a gully and across a field with a horse-drawn cart and sold it to a local paper company, which sounds like the most painful, exhausting day ever. A woman who bought it was named Blanche, and Frank made a cool $144 off the haul. He was hooked. Frank's notoriety, though, stems chiefly from his 50-year service as a volunteer tree warden to the town. In the 50s, with Dutch elm disease moving rapidly through the Northeast, the town decided to appoint an official to look after their elm population. With a lifetime spent in forestry, Frank was the obvious choice, and a good one. While most of the trees in the state were gone by the late 70s, there were 3 beautiful elms still standing on Main Street in Yarmouth. He told me about the efficacy of pruning diseased branches to stem the spread of infection, and shared a rather ringing endorsement of DDT. Aside from chemical treatments, Frank has another theory about the trees.
I don't know, there seemed to be a religion amongst these elms. They seem to do the best around churches and cemeteries.
The most notable tree Frank treated, however, is the one he couldn't save. Herbie was a massive 110-foot Dutch elm that at 212 years was the oldest of its kind in New England. Frank described his introduction to the behemoth.
And they put the ladder up beneath in the tree, and there were the kids playing under it. What are you going to do with the heavy? You don't tell us heavy. What's heavy? Well, that's heavy. And so they came back and told me, and so from that day on, it was heavy. Heavy got known from coast to coast.
A number of town selectmen advocated felling the diseased tree, stating that trying to save it was a futile effort. Frank, though, impressed by the grandeur of the tree, decided he would try. Over the next 5 decades, Frank helped Herbie fight off 15 bouts of Dutch elm. Last January, though, the decision was made to take the tree down. Frank was there. It's funny. Frank spent most of his life cutting down trees, and yet he'll undoubtedly be remembered for the one that he kept standing for over 50 years. This sign, if it weren't covered in snow, would read Yankee Drive, and somewhere under this mound of ice and debris from the road is Herbie, or what's left of him. The company that cut him down left a stump, a kind of headstone, and then this guy cleaned it up with an industrial hand vacuum. Maybe leaving it was a gesture of respect. Maybe it's because uprooting a 100-foot elm over 2 centuries old would have ripped up the road in front of and the house behind it. When I first heard the story, I think I wanted to believe almost morbidly that there was some kind of symbiotic relationship between Frank and this tree, that their existences were so intertwined that one just couldn't go on living without the other. But that's really not the story. I mean, Herbie is only part of Frank's life, just like Frank was only part of his. The problem is that, like any story about a tree, this one lends itself to appropriation by our own whimsy. We wanted to say something about us, to make it a parable about growth or mortality. And I'm not sure if Frank sees it that way. Not that he doesn't have a romantic spirit, he's just realistic. Herbie's gone, and Frank understands, as he put it, that his time is almost due as well. There's a stump somewhere under a pile of snow, a reminder of a tree that Frank couldn't save. And at some point, it'll be Frank and me too and everything, I guess. But Frank also has a story, and stories can be saved. At least I like to think they can.